Some were corrupt, others inept, and some just plain old stupid. These are the worst military leaders in history. Quintus Servilius Caepio. The Roman Empire has a long, proud tradition of producing some of the finest generals in human history and just as many of the worst. Quintus Servilius Caepio takes the cake amongst the worst Roman generals ever to take command of a legion, though. Caepio was born into a noble family and became consul in 106 BC. Self-interested and thoroughly corrupt, he allied himself with a skilled orator to sway the public into accepting a law that ensured only senators could be jury members, effectively stripping the working class of any power over legal proceedings. The law would eventually be struck down, but Caepio's corruption wouldn't end there. Appointed a Roman general, Caepio was en route to fight the Cimbri, a tribe of Germanic warriors, when he came across the sacred temples in the city of Toulouse. Caepio plundered a whopping 50,000 15-pound gold bars and 10,000 15-pound silver bars, a sum worth over 11 billion today. Caepio's plunder was shipped to Rome, but on its way a group of brigands attacked the convoy carrying the loot and stole all the gold, leaving only the silver to make it back home. It's widely believed that Caepio had hired the brigands himself and split the loot between himself and the group of mercenaries at a later point. Having plundered billions in gold, Caepio proceeded to link his forces with those of General Gnaeus Mallius Maximus in anticipation of battle against the Cimbri. However, upon learning that General Maximus was of a lower social class than him, he refused to accept his command or to even share a camp with him. Thus, Caepio moved his legions away from Maximus's camp and plotted what to do with the Cimbri on his own. Maximus was by all accounts a capable military commander and had the wisdom to know when to fight and when to negotiate. With the Cimbri, Maximus decided to negotiate and was in advanced stages of diplomacy when Caepio got wind of the proceedings. Convinced the Cimbri were weak, Caepio decided to attack without Maximus's forces. Caepio's forces were utterly annihilated, forcing him to flee for his life. However, the brutal defeat of his legions emboldened the Cimbri to attack Maximus's own camp. Maximus attempted to rally a defense but was overwhelmed by the Cimbri. In the end, over 80,000 Roman infantry and 40,000 mercenaries and Roman cavalry were killed, marking this one of Rome's worst defeats ever. Maximus would lose all of his sons in the battle, and upon returning to Rome was exiled from the empire for his defeat. Caepio too was forced into exile and stripped of his Roman citizenship, as well as fined 15,000 talents of gold. However, Caepio managed to evade the fine and fled to Asia Minor, where he would live in abundant luxury thanks to the gold he had stolen in France. Racist, corrupt, and stupid, Quintus Servilius Caepio left his mark on Roman history, though possibly not the way he dreamt of. In all likelihood, though, he probably could care less. Our next worst general was as inept and vain as he was cowardly. Gideon Pillow. It's a commonly held falsehood that during the American Civil War, the Union had the advantage in materials while the Confederacy had superior generals. In truth, the Confederacy did field better commanders in the East, but in the West, the Union had far superior leaders. Confederate General Gideon Pillow was by far the worst military commander in the Western theater of the Civil War. His career as a terrible military general began during the Mexican-American War. He was appointed to the rank of Major General by his close friend President James K. Polk, despite having no military experience prior to this. Pillow was nonetheless made commander of a unit of volunteers and dispatched to northern Mexico under the command of General Zachary Taylor. Unimpressed by the man, Taylor took Pillow's forces for an attack on Monterrey, leaving Pillow behind to garrison the army's depot at Camargo. Pillow immediately ordered the defenders to construct fortifications, facing the wrong way. Pillow's ineptitude would cost lives, though, at the Battle of Cerro Gordo. Tasked with launching a secondary attack on Santa Anna's right flank to destroy his artillery, Pillow chose to reinterpret his orders and instead launched an attack at the enemy's center. Pillow's forces were exposed to withering fire, costing many lives. Pillow was sent home on leave after the battle and wasted no time bragging about his exploits. Tennessee veterans returning home, however, were quick to correct the record, calling Pillow a coward and an idiot. Despite this, Pillow was returned to the war and promoted to Major General by his good friend President Polk. As the war progressed, Pillow would infuriate his fellow generals by writing fanciful stories to the press, aggrandizing his own successes while downplaying those of his compatriots, even outright stealing their glory. Pillow nonetheless denied the accusations, and despite being court-martialed, was saved once more by his friend President Polk. Pillow's greatest idiocy, however, would come during the American Civil War, when he single-handedly opened up the southern flank for invasion by the Union. Pillow was tasked with the defense of Fort Donelson, a strategically critical strongpoint on the Mississippi River that threatened to open up the Deep South to Union forces if destroyed. General Ulysses S. Grant had carefully surrounded the fort and cut it off from reinforcements before launching an attack. Surrounded and under fire from enemy ships on the Cumberland River, Confederate forces attempted a breakout so they could reconsolidate and mount a stronger defense. The Union's right flank and center was thrown into disarray and forced to retreat, opening up a path for the Confederates to slip away and join the reinforcements. Pillow, however, declined to cede ground and believed that he could hold off another Union attack on his own. Despite being implored to retreat by his men, Pillow ordered them back to their fortifications. Grant took the opportunity to mount a brutal counterattack that crushed the Confederate defenses. Only a few thousand troops managed to escape the Union onslaught, with Pillow alongside them, having slipped away in the dead of night. Pillow's foolishness handed the Mississippi over to the Union and guaranteed them access to the very heart of the Confederacy. Our next worst military leader in history was as bad a general as he was a dictator, almost single-handedly destroying his own country. Francisco Solano Lopez. The eldest son of dictator Carlos Antonio Lopez, Francisco seized power shortly after his father's death. His father had left him in command of a stable Paraguay with a relatively strong military and with warnings not to use military force to settle diplomatic disputes. Francisco paid literally zero attention to his father's warnings and immediately tried to put himself at the center of Latin American politics, backed up by his military. With Brazil to the north and the east and Argentina to the south, Paraguay's survival counted on the nation remaining neutral between the two Southern American superpowers. However, sensing an opportunity to raise his own standing in South America, Francisco placed himself smack dab between the two rival powers as he intervened in the Uruguayan Civil War, in which both Brazil and Argentina had their own stakes. Francisco hoped to help resolve the Civil War and thus make himself a political star. But instead, he managed to get his country into war with Brazil and pissed off the Argentinians. Flanked by Brazil in the east, Francisco took his idiocy to the next level by demanding that his troops be allowed to station themselves in the Argentine province of Corrientes. Argentina, however, had no wish to go to war with Brazil, and Francisco's incursion on their soil instead prompted Argentina to join in a three-way alliance with Brazil and Uruguay to destroy Paraguay. Let's take a moment to appreciate Francisco's staggering foolishness. Wishing to take center stage in South American politics, he tried to end the Uruguayan Civil War, and instead prompted Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina to declare war on him. The resulting war would be catastrophic for Paraguay, resulting in as much as half of the population dying. Francisco was forced to hiding in the mountains and hills where he tried to wage an unsuccessful guerrilla campaign against the Allied occupiers. Seized by extreme paranoia, he ordered the execution of any soldier or civilian who spoke of surrender. Francisco Solano Lopez would end up dying when he was gunned down trying to charge a group of Allied soldiers with a sword. Our next worst military leader was so out of touch he completely disregarded the impact of technology on modern warfare, leading to some of the greatest single-day losses of life in the history of war. Sir Douglas Haig. Sir Douglas Haig was made Chief of Staff of the British Expeditionary Forces as it joined World War I. At the time, Britain was a prosperous nation, an economic and military powerhouse which had enjoyed unrivaled supremacy for hundreds of years. Haig would be the nation's first step toward its tumble from glory. The opinions of historians differ on Haig, but most agree that he is part of the military leadership that led to the pointless slaughter of hundreds of thousands of British soldiers. Refusing to believe that the machine gun had made traditional combat obsolete, Haig was behind the tragedy that was the Battle of the Somme. On July 1, 1916, he ordered 110,000 British soldiers over the top. Such an overwhelming attack would indubitably secure victory and break the German army's center. 20,000 would die in one day, and another 40,000 would be wounded. Over half of the first attack had returned as a casualty or not at all. Despite this, Haig had the nerve to write in his personal journal that the scope of the attack and the wide front made the casualties perfectly acceptable and expected. Convinced that the attack had weakened the enemy significantly, Haig ordered the British army back over the top again, and then again, and again, and again, for 4 months straight until nature took pity on the massive loss of British life and winter conditions made further attacks impossible. Haig was not just stubborn, he was living in a dream world of denial. Despite the massive casualties inflicted on his forces by German machine guns, Haig believed that the machine gun was overrated and not responsible for his great losses. He believed so little in the machine gun that as each new attack on the Germans was launched, he brought up cavalry reserves, fully expecting the army to punch a hole through the German front, which would be exploited by Haig's horse-borne cavalry. Perhaps the luckiest soldier in the British Army at the time were the cavalry, which on their own would be decimated by modern firearms. But thanks to the British Army's inability to break through German defenses, never had to undertake their own suicidal charge. Haig was so out of touch with modern combat that he failed to learn lessons from even 100-year-old wars and insisted on his men charging forward at a moderately fast walk so that their lines could be better maintained and order and discipline enforced. All this did was make the British soldiers easier targets for German riflemen and machine gunners. But despite 500,000 casualties, Haig refused to change tactics.